Millionaire never respected his wife, but that night at the gala, she showed up uninvited with his twin girls, and he changed forever. When Sophia Jackson walked uninvited into the Meridian Foundation Gala in her crimson dress, carrying the twin daughters her millionaire husband had forgotten existed, Harrison Gatsby's world didn't just stop. It shattered completely, then began to rebuild itself around love. But that moment of reckoning was still hours away. The morning had begun like every other in the Gatsby mansion, with the sound of Harrison's Italian leather shoes clicking against marble floors, the rustle of his Wall Street journal, and the conspicuous absence of conversation. Sophia stood at the kitchen island, her silk robe catching the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Steam rose from her untouched coffee as she watched Harrison scroll through his phone, his platinum cufflinks catching the light. 22 months of marriage, and she couldn't remember the last time those steel-grey eyes had looked at her, truly looked at her, instead of through her. The twins said their first words yesterday, she offered, her voice soft but hopeful. Harrison's thumb paused over his screen for exactly 2 seconds. That's nice, sweetheart. The endearment fell flat, automatic and hollow. He reached for his coffee without lifting his gaze, his wedding ring clicking against the porcelain. Did you remember to schedule the landscaping meeting? Emma and Grace's delighted squeals echoed from the nursery upstairs, where their nanny was getting them ready for the day. Sophia's heart clenched. Their daughters had said Dada and Mama within minutes of each other, reaching for everything and nothing, their tiny voices full of wonder. She'd recorded it on her phone, watched it 17 times while waiting for Harrison to come home from his emergency meeting that had stretched past midnight. They said Dada, she tried again, her fingers tightening around her mug. And Mama, I have a video. I've got the Morrison call in 10 minutes. Harrison stood, straightening his charcoal suit jacket with practiced efficiency. The fabric was perfectly tailored, hugging his tall frame in a way that had once made her pulse quicken. Now it felt like armor, another barrier between them. Can we talk about this later? Later. Always later. Later had become a foreign country they never visited. Sophia nodded, watching him check his Patek Philippe watch, a wedding gift from his father that cost more than most people's cars. He'd worn it every day since their honeymoon, but she wondered if he remembered who'd fastened it around his wrist that first morning in Santorini, when he'd whispered promises about forever and always being present for each other. The Meridian Foundation Gala is tonight, she said, though she knew he knew. She'd mentioned it every day for the past week, had his tuxedo pressed and hanging in their walk-in closet, had arranged for the nanny to stay late. I thought maybe we could. Business function. Harrison's tone was crisp, final. He grabbed his keys from the marble counter, the sound sharp in the morning stillness. I'll be networking with the board members. You'd be bored. You'd be bored. The words hit her like a physical blow. Not I'd love to take you, or we should go together. Just dismissal, wrapped in the pretense of consideration. I might not be, she said quietly, but he was already moving toward the door, his phone pressed to his ear. Morrison? Yes, I've got the quarterly projections. His voice faded as he disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and the echo of his indifference. Sophia remained at the island, staring at the space where her husband had been. The kitchen was a monument to their success. Italian marble, German appliances, custom cabinetry that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Everything was perfect, pristine, and utterly cold. She walked to the window, pressing her palm against the glass. Outside, their manicured lawn stretched toward the private lake that had sold Harrison on the property. The girls will love feeding the ducks, he'd said when they'd toured the house while she was still pregnant. We'll have picnics by the water. The lake was empty now, its surface reflecting the grey October sky. She couldn't remember the last time Harrison had walked the grounds, let alone suggested a picnic. Mrs. Gatsby? Maria, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. The twins are asking for you. Sophia turned, managing a smile. I'll be right there. But as she headed toward the stairs, she caught sight of herself in the antique mirror Harrison's mother had insisted they hang in the foyer. The woman looking back was still beautiful, her dark skin glowing with health, her natural hair styled in elegant waves that framed her face. But there was something missing in her reflection, something that had been there when Harrison first looked at her across that crowded charity auction 3 years ago. She'd been wearing red that night too. A simple dress, nothing like the designer gowns surrounding her, but Harrison had crossed the room like a man possessed. "I'm sorry," he'd said, his voice rough with something she'd later recognize as desire. "I know this is forward, but I couldn't let you leave without telling you that you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." When was the last time he'd called her beautiful? The question followed her up the stairs, where Emma and Grace waited in their nursery. At 18 months, they were perfect combinations of both parents. Harrison's grey eyes and strong jaw, Sophia's warm skin and infectious smile. They reached for her with chubby arms, babbling in their secret twin language, and for a moment, her heart felt whole again. "Mama," Emma said clearly, and Sophia's breath caught. "Dada," Grace added, looking around the room as if searching for the man who was already gone. Sophia gathered them close, inhaling their baby scent, feeling their tiny hearts beating against her chest. "Daddy's at work," she whispered, though the words felt like an excuse she'd been making for months. Hours passed in the rhythm of motherhood. Feedings, diaper changes, story time, and the endless, joyful chaos of toddlers discovering the world. But underneath it all, a tension was building, a quiet desperation that had been growing stronger each day. By evening, the mansion felt like a museum. Harrison had texted once, running late. "Go ahead and eat without me." No mention of the gala, no acknowledgement that she might want to attend, no recognition that she existed beyond her role as caretaker of his children and keeper of his home. Sophia stood in their bedroom, staring at the crimson dress hanging in her closet. She'd bought it months ago, back when she still believed Harrison would remember how to see her. The silk was the color of confidence, of passion, of the woman she'd been before she'd become invisible. She pulled it from the hanger, holding it against her body. The fabric was cool against her skin, and she could picture how it would look, the way it would hug her curves, the way the color would make her glow. She'd worn it to dinner parties before their marriage, had seen the way Harrison's eyes would darken when she walked into a room. When was the last time he'd looked at her with desire? The question had barely formed when she heard Harrison's car in the driveway. She quickly hung the dress back up, smoothing her simple black pants and cream silk blouse. By the time he entered their bedroom, she was sitting at her vanity, removing her earrings with practiced calm. "How was your day?" she asked, meeting his eyes in the mirror. Harrison loosened his tie, his reflection appearing behind hers. "Productive. The Morrison deal is moving forward." He paused, studying her face in the glass. For a moment, something flickered in his expression, a shadow of the man who'd once traced her jawline with reverent fingers. "You look tired. You look tired. Not beautiful, not missed, not loved. Just tired." "I'm fine," she said, though she felt anything but fine. "How was the gala?" "Gala?" Harrison frowned, then understanding dawned. "Oh, right. It's tonight. I should start getting ready. Should start getting ready. Singular. Not plural. Not we." Sophia watched him move through their bedroom like a stranger, selecting his tuxedo with the same care he'd choose any other business outfit. This was what their marriage had become. Two people sharing space but not lives, existing in parallel rather than together. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "maybe I could come with you. Maria could watch the twins, and we could." "It's really not that kind of event, Sophia." Harrison's voice was gentle but firm, the tone he might use with a child asking for something inappropriate. "It's all business talk, donor cultivation, board politics. You'd be miserable. You'd be miserable." Because he couldn't conceive of her as anything but a delicate flower who needed protection from the complexities of his world. Because he'd forgotten that she'd run her own successful event planning business before they'd married, that she'd been the one to organize the charity auction where they'd met. "I used to plan events like this," she reminded him, her voice barely above a whisper. Harrison paused in adjusting his cufflinks. "That was different. This is." He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "This is my world, Sophia. You have your own world here. The twins need you. The twins need you." The ultimate dismissal, wrapped in the language of necessity. As if she existed only in relation to their children, as if she had no identity beyond motherhood. But as she watched him finish dressing, something shifted inside her. The woman in the red dress, the one who'd caught a millionaire's attention across a crowded room, was still there, buried under months of neglect and casual dismissal. She'd been waiting, gathering strength, preparing for this moment. Harrison kissed her forehead as he left, a habit so automatic she doubted he even registered the contact. "Don't wait up," he said, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with the ghosts of who they used to be. Sophia sat in the silence for a long time, staring at her reflection. Then, slowly, she stood and walked to her closet. The red dress waited like a promise, like a weapon, like a choice. She'd been invisible for too long. Tonight, that would change. If you're enjoying this story, click subscribe and let me know what time it is where you're tuning in from. I'll love to know how far the lessons in this story can go. Now, back to the story. The Meridian Foundation Gala was everything Harrison Gatsby had expected. A symphony of wealth and influence played out in crystal and gold. The Metropolitan Museum's Great Hall had been transformed into a glittering monument to philanthropy, where champagne flowed like promises and business deals were sealed with handshakes worth millions. Harrison stood near the grand staircase, his burgundy tuxedo jacket catching the light from the Austrian crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks overhead. The fabric was rich and textured, a deep wine color that spoke of confidence and power. He'd chosen it specifically for tonight, something that would set him apart from the sea of predictable black tuxedos, while still maintaining the elegant restraint expected of his social circle. "Gatsby, there you are." Robert Meridian III approached, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile sharp as a blade. "I was just telling the Morrison representatives about your innovative approach to the sustainability initiative." "Robert." Harrison accepted the handshake, his own smile practiced and professional. "The Morrison deal should be finalized by Friday. I think you'll be pleased with the projected returns." The conversation flowed with the easy rhythm of men who spoke in millions, who measured success in quarterly reports and market shares. Around them, the city's elite mingled in designer gowns and tailored suits, their laughter mixing with the gentle melody of a string quartet positioned near the museum's soaring windows. Harrison felt in his element here, surrounded by marble columns and Renaissance paintings, by people who understood the language of power and influence. This was his world, the world he'd built through 15 years of relentless ambition and strategic networking. Every handshake was calculated, every conversation a potential pathway to greater success. "The foundation is looking at expanding into international markets," Robert continued, his voice low and confidential. "We'll need someone with your expertise to head the European division. It would mean significant travel, of course, but the compensation package." He let the implication hang in the air like expensive perfume. Harrison nodded, his mind already calculating the possibilities. European expansion would mean months abroad, establishing new offices, building relationships with international partners. The kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, the kind that could triple his net worth and cement his position among the city's most powerful men. "I'd be very interested in discussing the details," he said, accepting another glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The crystal felt cool against his palm, the bubbles dancing like tiny celebrations. "Excellent. We'll arrange a meeting next week. Just you and the board members. No need for wives or family distractions." Robert's smile was understanding, man to man. This level of commitment requires absolute focus. No need for wives or family distractions. The words should have felt like validation, like recognition of his dedication. Instead, something twisted uncomfortably in Harrison's chest, a sensation he couldn't quite name. The evening progressed with the predictable elegance of high society. Harrison worked the room with practiced ease, moving from conversation to conversation like a conductor leading an orchestra. He discussed market trends with pharmaceutical executives, debated policy changes with congressmen, and charmed potential investors with stories of his latest acquisitions. But underneath the familiar rhythm of networking, something felt different tonight. A restlessness he couldn't shake, a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with business deals or profit margins. He found himself glancing toward the entrance more frequently, though he couldn't have said what he was looking for. Harrison. Margaret Whitmore approached in a cloud of Chanel and ambition, her smile as sharp as her diamond earrings. Darling, you simply must tell me about your latest acquisition. I heard through the grapevine that you've outdone yourself this time. Margaret. Harrison kissed her cheek, inhaling her familiar perfume. She was exactly the kind of woman his mother approved of: old money, perfect breeding, the kind of connections that opened doors and closed deals. The Pemberton property was certainly a worthwhile investment. Oh, not the real estate, darling. Margaret's laugh was musical, practiced. I'm talking about your newest addition. Though I must say, I'm surprised we haven't seen more of your lovely wife lately. She used to be so involved in the social scene. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow, though he couldn't have explained why. Sophia had been involved, intensely so, in the months following their marriage. She'd thrown herself into charity work, had organized fundraisers that were still talked about in their social circle. When had she stopped attending? When had she become absent from the very world she'd once navigated with such grace? She's been focused on the twins, Harrison said automatically, the same explanation he'd been giving for months. You know how it is with young children. Oh, of course. Margaret's smile was understanding, but there was something else in her eyes. Pity? It's just such a shame to waste such talent. She had such innovative ideas for the children's hospital benefit. But I suppose motherhood changes everything. It's just such a shame to waste such talent. The words echoed in Harrison's mind as Margaret drifted away, leaving him standing alone near the museum's grand windows. Outside, the city sparkled like a jewel, but inside, something cold was settling in his chest. When had he started thinking of Sophia as someone who belonged at home rather than at his side? When had he begun to see her motherhood as a limitation rather than another facet of her strength? The questions came unbidden, unwelcome, threatening to disrupt the carefully constructed narrative of his life. He was saved from further introspection by the arrival of the evening's main event, the presentation of the Foundation's annual humanitarian award. The lights dimmed, and the crowd gathered around the small stage that had been erected near the museum's central fountain. Harrison found himself a position near the back, champagne in hand, prepared to applaud appropriately and network during the reception that would follow. The presenter began his speech, but Harrison's attention drifted. This was familiar territory. The same speeches, the same faces, the same careful dance of wealth and philanthropy. He'd attended hundreds of these events, had given dozens of similar speeches himself. The routine was comforting, predictable, safe. And then she appeared. At first, Harrison thought he was imagining things. The champagne, the warm lights, the familiar stress of networking, they could all contribute to hallucinations. But as the figure at the entrance moved into the light, there was no denying the reality of what he was seeing. Sophia. She stood in the museum's arched doorway, like a vision from another world, her crimson dress a shock of color against the neutral elegance of the gala. The silk hugged her curves in ways that made Harrison's mouth go dry, the deep red fabric seeming to glow against her dark skin. Her hair was styled in soft waves that framed her face, and her makeup was flawless, subtle but striking, emphasizing the natural beauty that had first captured his attention 3 years ago. But it wasn't just her appearance that stopped Harrison's breath. It was what she carried in her arms. Emma and Grace, dressed in matching cream-colored outfits that complemented their mother's gown, looked around the grand hall with wide, curious eyes. Their dark curls were crowned with tiny pearl headbands, and their little black patent leather shoes caught the light from the chandeliers. They were beautiful, perfect, and completely out of place in this world of adult sophistication. The presenter's voice faded to a distant hum as Harrison watched his wife walk into his carefully constructed world. She moved with purpose, her head held high, her stride confident despite the weight of their 18-month-old daughters. The red carpet that had been laid for the evening's VIP guests seemed to have been placed specifically for her entrance, leading her directly into the heart of the gala like a path to destiny. Conversations died as she passed. Heads turned, whispers began, and the carefully orchestrated elegance of the evening shifted into something electric and unpredictable. Harrison felt the change like a physical force, the way the air pressure shifts before a storm. She was coming toward him. The realization hit Harrison like a physical blow. This wasn't coincidence, wasn't some misguided attempt to surprise him. This was intentional, deliberate, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Sophia had dressed herself and their daughters like queens, had walked into his world uninvited, and was now crossing the marble floor with the dignity of someone who belonged here. But she did belong here. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome, and utterly true. She'd belonged here all along, and he'd been the one to exile her to the margins of his life. Jesus Christ, someone whispered behind him. Is that Harrison Gatsby's wife? What's she doing here? Another voice hissed. And with the children? Harrison wanted to move, to meet her halfway, to somehow control the situation before it spiraled beyond his management. But his feet felt rooted to the marble floor, his body frozen in a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something else he couldn't quite name. Sophia continued her approach, her dark eyes locked on his. There was no anger in her expression, no vindictiveness or cruelty. Instead, there was a calm determination that was somehow more terrifying than any explosion of emotion would have been. She looked like a woman who had made a decision, who had chosen her path, and was walking it with absolute certainty. The crowd parted naturally before her, creating a clear path between the entrance and where Harrison stood. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. She was walking through his world, claiming her place in it, demanding recognition from the people who had accepted her absence without question. Emma babbled something unintelligible, her tiny hand reaching toward the sparkling chandeliers overhead. Grace was quieter, more observant, her grey eyes, so like Harrison's own, taking in the grandeur around her with solemn intensity. They were beautiful children, obviously well cared for, clearly loved. They were also proof of what Harrison had been ignoring, evidence of the life he'd been living separate from his professional success. Harrison. Sophia's voice carried across the final few feet between them, soft but clear enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. She didn't need to raise her voice. The entire room had fallen silent, waiting to see how this unprecedented moment would unfold. He opened his mouth to speak, to say something that would explain or excuse or somehow make sense of the situation, but no words came. What could he say? That she wasn't supposed to be here? That she was embarrassing him? That she was disrupting his carefully planned evening? All of those things were true, but they were also irrelevant in the face of what was actually happening. She was here, she was beautiful, she was carrying their children, and she was looking at him with eyes that held months of accumulated hurt and hope and desperate love. I brought our daughters to meet their father, Sophia said simply, her voice carrying the weight of quiet dignity. She shifted Grace to her other arm, the movement highlighting the graceful lines of her neck and shoulders. They've been asking for you. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. They've been asking for you. Not accusatory, not angry, just a simple statement of fact that somehow contained the entire tragedy of their marriage. His daughters had been asking for him, and he hadn't been there to answer. Dada, Emma said suddenly, her voice piping and clear in the massive hall. Her little hand reached toward Harrison, her face breaking into a smile that was pure joy and recognition. The sound of his daughter's voice calling for him in front of 200 of the city's most influential people should have been mortifying. Instead, it was like being struck by lightning, a moment of perfect clarity that illuminated everything he'd been missing. Harrison's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. The business deals, the networking, the careful cultivation of power and influence, all of it faded into background noise as he stared at his family. Really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in months. Sophia was radiant in her red dress, but it was more than her physical beauty that took his breath away. It was the strength in her posture, the quiet courage it must have taken to walk into this room uninvited. It was the way she held their daughters with such natural grace, the way she dressed them like little princesses for their unexpected debut in society. "Sophia," he whispered, her name feeling foreign on his tongue. When had he stopped saying her name with reverence? When had she become just his wife, instead of Sophia, the woman who had turned his world upside down with her smile? The room around them held its breath. Harrison could feel the weight of every gaze, could practically hear the phones being surreptitiously pulled from purses and pockets to capture this moment. By tomorrow, this scene would be dissected in every social circle, analyzed in every society column. His carefully maintained image of professional success and personal perfection was crumbling in real time. And for the first time in months, Harrison found that he didn't care about his image at all. "They're beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in too long. "You're all beautiful." Sophia's composure wavered for just a moment, her eyes brightening with unshed tears. "They missed you," she said softly. "I missed you." The admission hung between them like a bridge, fragile, precious, and absolutely terrifying in its honesty. Harrison felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been locked away for months behind meetings and deals, and the relentless pursuit of more. He started to speak, to offer some explanation or excuse, but the words died in his throat. What could he say? That he'd been busy? That work had demanded his attention? That he'd forgotten how to be a husband and father in his pursuit of being a success? All of those things were true, but they were also inadequate. Standing here in his burgundy tuxedo, surrounded by the symbols of his achievement, Harrison realized that he'd gained the world and lost his soul. He'd become rich in everything except the things that actually mattered. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" Sophia asked, her voice gentle but firm. It wasn't really a question. It was an invitation, a challenge, a moment of choice that would define everything that came after. Harrison looked at Emma, who was still reaching for him with chubby fingers, her face bright with expectation. Then he looked at Grace, who was watching him with solemn eyes that seemed to see straight through to his heart. Finally, he looked at Sophia, who was offering him not just his daughters, but a chance at redemption. Have you ever had a moment where you realized you'd been living your life completely wrong? Sometimes it takes a shock to wake us up to what really matters. What do you think Harrison should do next? Let me know in the comments below. The choice was his. He could turn away, could make excuses, could preserve his professional image, and deal with the personal consequences later. Or he could step forward, could claim his family in front of everyone who mattered in his professional world, could choose love over image and vulnerability over control. Harrison Gatsby had built an empire on calculated decisions, on careful risk assessment and strategic thinking. But as he stood in that glittering hall, surrounded by the fruits of his ambition, there was only one choice that mattered. He stepped forward and opened his arms. The weight of Emma in his arms was both familiar and foreign. Harrison held his daughter carefully, as if she might break, his large hands trembling slightly as she settled against his burgundy jacket. She was heavier than he remembered, more solid, more real. When had she grown so much? When had her baby features sharpened into the beginnings of the little girl she was becoming? "Dada," Emma whispered again, her small hand fisting in his lapel. The word was soft, trusting, and it hit Harrison like a physical blow. She knew him. Despite his absence, despite the months of missed bedtimes and forgotten moments, she still knew him as her father. The crowd around them had begun to stir, the initial shock giving way to whispered conversations and poorly concealed stares. Harrison could feel the weight of every gaze, could practically hear the mental calculations being made by his business associates and social peers. This was unprecedented, a breach of protocol that would be discussed in boardrooms and country clubs for months to come. "Well," Robert Meridian's voice cut through the murmur of voices, his tone carefully neutral. "This is certainly unexpected." Harrison looked up from his daughter's face to find Robert approaching, his expression unreadable. Behind him, other members of the foundation board were watching with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. Margaret Whitmore stood nearby, her eyes bright with the kind of speculation that fueled society gossip for weeks. "Robert," Harrison said, his voice steadier than he felt, "I'd like you to meet my daughter, Emma. And this is Grace." He gestured toward Sophia, who was watching the exchange with quiet intensity. "Charming," Robert replied, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Though I have to say, Harrison, this is quite unconventional. The gala isn't typically a family affair." The words were polite, but the underlying message was clear. You're making a spectacle. You're disrupting the natural order. You're embarrassing yourself and us. Harrison felt the familiar pull of social expectation, the pressure to conform to the unspoken rules of his world. He should make excuses, should explain that this was a misunderstanding, should find a way to gracefully remove his family from the situation and restore the evening to its proper trajectory. Instead, he found himself saying, "My wife thought it was time our daughters experienced something beyond the walls of our home." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise everyone else. There was something in his tone, a note of pride perhaps, or defiance, that hadn't been there moments before. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, and he saw something flicker across her face that might have been hope. "Of course," Robert said smoothly, though his disapproval was evident. "Well, perhaps we should." "They're beautiful children," Margaret interrupted, moving closer to examine the twins with the careful attention of someone appraising valuable objects. "They certainly have your eyes, Harrison. And your wife is absolutely stunning tonight. That dress is quite striking." The compliment felt like a backhanded slap. "Quite striking. The kind of thing you said about something that was impressive but inappropriate, like wearing diamonds to a funeral or serving champagne at a business meeting." Grace, who had been quiet in Sophia's arms, suddenly reached toward Harrison with both hands. "Dada," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the adult conversation like a bell. The word hung in the air, innocent and devastating. Harrison felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking, but opening, like ice giving way to spring. Without thinking, he shifted Emma to one arm and reached for Grace with the other. "Here," Sophia said softly, stepping closer to help with the transfer. "She's been asking for you." As Grace settled into his other arm, Harrison caught Sophia's scent, something warm and familiar that reminded him of lazy Sunday mornings and whispered conversations in the dark. She was close enough that he could see the subtle tremor in her hands, the way she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. This hadn't been easy for her. Walking into this room, facing the stares and whispers, challenging the social order that had kept her safely tucked away at home. It had taken courage he was only beginning to understand. "They've grown so much," he murmured, looking down at his daughters' faces. Emma was studying the crystal chandeliers with wide eyes, while Grace was more focused on his face, her small hand patting his cheek with gentle curiosity. "They change every day," Sophia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma took 3 steps on Tuesday. Grace said book. Yesterday when I was reading to them. Emma took 3 steps. Grace said book." Milestones he'd missed, moments that had happened in his absence. How many firsts had passed while he was in meetings? How many small miracles had occurred in the nursery while he was pursuing deals and acquisitions? "I should have been there," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "Yes," Sophia agreed simply. "You should have." The honesty in her voice was like a knife, clean and sharp and necessary. She wasn't trying to comfort him or make excuses for his absence. She was simply stating the truth, and somehow that made it worse than any accusation would have been. "Harrison," Robert's voice cut through the moment, "perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private? The presentation is about to resume, and—" "No." The word came out stronger than Harrison had intended. "We're fine here." Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm sorry. I said we're fine." Harrison looked around the room, taking in the faces of people he'd known for years, business associates, social contacts, the carefully curated network he'd built to support his ambitions. "My family is welcome wherever I am." The declaration sent ripples through the crowd. Harrison could see the calculations happening in real time. The reassessment of his priorities, The speculation about what this meant for his professional relationships, the whispered questions about whether this was a momentary lapse or something more significant. "Of course," Robert said after a beat, his tone carefully controlled. "Though I hope you'll remember our conversation about the European expansion. That level of commitment requires flexibility. That level of commitment requires flexibility." The euphemism was clear. A man who brought his family to business events, who allowed personal considerations to interfere with professional obligations, was not the kind of man who could be trusted with international expansion. Harrison felt the familiar tug of ambition, the pull of opportunities that could define his career. The European position would be everything he'd worked toward: prestige, power, the kind of success that lasted generations. All he had to do was restore the proper order, send his family home, and prove that tonight was an aberration rather than a revelation. "I'll keep that in mind," he said finally, his voice non-committal. But as he spoke, Emma made a small sound of contentment, settling more comfortably against his chest. Her trust was absolute, her love unconditional. She didn't care about European expansion, or quarterly profits, or the opinions of men in expensive suits. She only cared that he was holding her, that he was present, that he was her father. "Perhaps we should find somewhere quieter to talk," Sophia suggested, her voice carefully neutral. "The girls are getting tired." It was an escape route, a way to defuse the tension and remove themselves from the center of attention. Harrison should have been grateful for her diplomacy, for her understanding of the social dynamics at play. Instead, he found himself saying, "Actually, I think we should stay. The presentation will be starting soon, and I'd like my daughters to see it." The words surprised everyone, including himself. "Stay? Here? With two 18-month-old children, who were already beginning to fidget and fuss?" "Harrison," Margaret said with a laugh that didn't quite mask her concern, "surely you don't mean to keep the babies here for the entire presentation? They'll be disruptive. They'll be disruptive. The same way Sophia would be disruptive. The same way family was always disruptive to the smooth operation of business and social climbing. The same way love was disruptive to the pursuit of power." "They're not babies," Harrison said, his voice carrying a note of steel. "They're my daughters, and they have as much right to be here as anyone else." Sophia's intake of breath was audible. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but also something that might have been recognition. As if she was seeing someone she'd thought was lost forever. "Dada," Grace said again, this time with more insistence. She was reaching for his face, her small fingers exploring the familiar contours of his jaw and cheek. "Dada, Dada." "Yes," Harrison said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here." The simple words carried more weight than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. "I'm here." Present tense, immediate, real. Not "I'll be there later," or "I'll make time soon," or any of the other promises he'd been making and breaking for months. "I'm here." The presenter had resumed his position on the small stage, clearing his throat to regain the crowd's attention. But Harrison found that he couldn't focus on the words, couldn't engage with the familiar rhythm of speeches and applause. His world had narrowed to the weight of his daughters in his arms, to the woman standing beside him, who had somehow found the courage to walk into his world and demand recognition. "They're hungry," Sophia said quietly, noticing the way Emma was beginning to fuss. "I brought snacks, but—" She gestured helplessly at the elegant surroundings, the crystal and marble and careful sophistication that had no place for sippy cups and goldfish crackers. This was the world Harrison had chosen, the world where children were an inconvenience and family was a disruption. "Here," Harrison said, surprising himself again. "Let me." He began to move toward the side of the room, away from the center of attention, but not fleeing entirely. Sophia followed, her red dress a splash of color against the neutral elegance of the museum's decor. As they found a quieter corner near one of the towering windows, Harrison realized that he was making a choice, not just about tonight, but about who he wanted to be. "I have everything they need," Sophia said, pulling a small diaper bag from behind a marble pillar where she'd apparently stashed it. The bag was elegant, designed to match her dress, but it was still unmistakably a diaper bag, another symbol of the life he'd been ignoring. As she produced crackers and juice cups with practiced efficiency, Harrison watched her hands. The same hands that had once planned events like this one, that had organized charity auctions and fundraising galas with creative brilliance. When had he started thinking of those hands as belonging only to motherhood? When had he forgotten that she was capable of so much more? "You planned the children's hospital benefit," he said suddenly, the memory surfacing like a bubble rising to the surface of still water. 2 years ago, it raised more money than any event in the hospital's history. Sophia's hands stilled for a moment. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about that night," Harrison said, and as he spoke, he realized it was true. "You wore a gold dress. You gave a speech that made half the audience cry. You made me proud to be your husband. Made me proud to be your husband." Past tense, as if that pride had been lost somewhere along the way. As if he'd forgotten what it felt like to be married to a woman who could command a room, who could move hearts and minds with her passion and intelligence. "That was a long time ago," Sophia said quietly, but there was something in her voice, a note of wistfulness, perhaps, or regret. "Not that long," Harrison replied. "Not long enough to matter. But it was long enough. Long enough for him to lose sight of the woman he'd married. Long enough for him to reduce her to nothing more than the keeper of his home and the mother of his children. Long enough for him to forget that she was Sophia Jackson, brilliant, beautiful, brave enough to walk into his world uninvited and demand recognition. What happens when you realize you've been taking someone for granted? Sometimes the people closest to us become invisible not because they've changed, but because we've stopped seeing them. Do you think Harrison can truly change? Or is this just a temporary moment of clarity? I'd love to hear your thoughts. The question hung between them like a challenge, like a test of whether this moment was real or just another performance. Harrison felt the weight of months of neglect, of casual dismissals and forgotten promises. He felt the weight of his daughters in his arms, trusting and innocent and completely dependent on him to be the father they deserved. Most of all, he felt the weight of Sophia's gaze, steady and patient, and full of the kind of love that could either save him or destroy him, depending on what he chose to do next. The choice was his. It had always been his. The museum's side gallery was quieter, removed from the main presentation, but still bathed in the warm glow of crystal sconces. Harrison found himself in an alcove lined with Renaissance paintings, their gilt frames catching the light, while Emma and Grace contentedly shared goldfish crackers from Sophia's carefully packed bag. "Better?" Sophia asked, settling onto a marble bench with practiced grace. The red silk of her dress pooled around her like liquid fire, and Harrison found himself remembering the first time he'd seen her in that color. Confident, radiant, utterly captivating. "Better," he agreed, though the word felt inadequate for the storm of emotions churning in his chest. He sat beside her, still holding Grace while Emma had migrated to Sophia's lap, and for a moment they looked like what they were supposed to be, a family. The presentation continued in the main hall, the presenter's voice a distant murmur, punctuated by polite applause. Harrison should have been there, should have been networking and nurturing the relationships that fed his ambition. Instead, he found himself studying his daughters' faces, memorizing details he'd somehow missed in his rush toward success. "They have your stubborn streak," Sophia said softly, watching Emma attempt to feed a goldfish cracker to one of the marble cherubs adorning the bench. "And your determination." "They have your beauty," Harrison replied, and the words came out rougher than he'd intended. "And your strength." Sophia's eyes met his, and for a moment the careful composure she'd maintained all evening flickered. "Harrison, I've been a terrible husband," he interrupted, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "A terrible father. I've been so focused on building something for our family that I forgot about the family itself." The admission hung between them like a bridge, fragile, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. Harrison felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the public nature of their earlier confrontation, and everything to do with the woman sitting beside him. "You haven't been terrible," Sophia said carefully. You've been absent. Absent. The word was somehow worse than terrible. Terrible implied active wrongdoing, conscious choices to cause harm. Absent was worse. It was indifference, negligence, the casual dismissal of everything that should have mattered most. I missed Emma's first steps, Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. I missed Grace saying book. I missed. God, Sophia, I missed everything. Grace had fallen asleep in his arms, her small body warm and trusting against his chest. Her breathing was deep and even, and Harrison found himself counting each breath, marveling at the simple miracle of her existence. When had he stopped noticing these small wonders? They're still young, Sophia said gently. There's still time. Is there? Harrison looked at her directly, searching her face for the truth she might be too kind to speak. Is there still time for us? The question hung between them, loaded with months of accumulated distance and neglect. Harrison realized he was holding his breath, waiting for her answer, terrified of what it might be. I don't know, Sophia admitted, and the honesty in her voice was like a knife. I want there to be. I've been wanting there to be for months. But wanting isn't enough, Harrison. I need to know that you see me. I need to know that you see me. The words hit him like a physical blow. How long had it been since he'd really looked at her? Since he'd seen Sophia Jackson, the woman who'd captured his heart with her intelligence and passion, rather than just his wife. A role, a function, a box to be checked in his perfectly ordered life? I see you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. God, Sophia, I see you. You're wearing the red dress you bought for the Morrison anniversary party. You're wearing the pearl earrings my mother gave you for our wedding. You've done something different with your hair. It's softer, more like how you wore it when we first met. Sophia's eyes widened, surprise flickering across her features. You noticed? I notice everything about you, Harrison said, the words coming from somewhere deep in his chest. The way you hum when you're concentrating. The way you curl your toes when you're thinking. The way you look at our daughters like they're the most precious things in the world. They are, Sophia whispered. So are you, Harrison replied, and the truth of it hit him like lightning. You're the most precious thing in my world, and I've been treating you like a housekeeper, Sophia finished quietly. Like a nanny. Like someone whose job it is to manage the parts of your life you don't want to deal with. The words were brutal in their accuracy. Harrison wanted to defend himself, to explain that he'd never consciously reduced her to those roles. But consciousness wasn't the point. Intent wasn't the point. The impact was the point, and the impact had been devastating. I'm sorry, he said, and the words felt inadequate, insufficient for the damage he'd caused. I'm so sorry, Sophia. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be better. You could start by being present, Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Really present. Not just physically here, but here. With us. With me. Harrison shifted Grace to one arm and reached for Sophia's hand with the other. Her fingers were cool against his palm, and he could feel the slight tremor that betrayed her composure. I want to be, he said. I want to be the husband you deserve. The father our daughters deserve. Then be, Sophia said simply. Stop wanting and start being. The challenge in her voice was clear. Words were easy. Promises were simple. Action was what mattered, and action required sacrifice, of time, of ambition, of the carefully constructed barriers he'd built around his heart. The European expansion, Harrison said slowly, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Robert offered me the position tonight. It would mean months abroad, constant travel, the kind of opportunity that would take you away from us, Sophia finished. Again, it would make us incredibly wealthy, Harrison said, but even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. They were already wealthy. They had everything money could buy. What they didn't have was what mattered most. We're already wealthy, Sophia said, echoing his thoughts. What we're not is happy. What we're not is happy. The truth of it was staggering. Despite the mansion, the cars, the investments and acquisitions and quarterly profits, Harrison couldn't remember the last time he'd felt genuinely happy. Content with his achievements, perhaps. Satisfied with his progress. But happy. I turned down the Pemberton deal, he said suddenly, the memory surfacing like a revelation. 3 months ago, it would have been incredibly profitable, but it would have meant working weekends for 6 months. And I thought I should be home more. Sophia's hand tightened in his. You never told me. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that you wouldn't care about the details of business decisions. Harrison laughed bitterly. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if I admitted I was choosing you over profits, I'd have to keep choosing you. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to do that consistently. The admission hung between them like a confession. Harrison had built his identity around success, around the relentless pursuit of more. The idea of choosing family over ambition felt like choosing weakness over strength, like betraying everything he'd worked to become. Strength isn't about choosing work over family, Sophia said quietly. Strength is about choosing what matters most, even when it's difficult. Emma, who had been quietly playing with the buttons on Sophia's dress, suddenly looked up at Harrison with wide, serious eyes. Dada, she said, reaching for him with both hands. Harrison gathered her into his other arm, now holding both his daughters, while Sophia watched with an expression he couldn't quite read. The weight of them was substantial, warm, real. They smelled like baby shampoo and goldfish crackers, and their trust was absolute. I want to choose you, he said, looking at Sophia over their daughters' heads. I want to choose all of you, but I'm scared I don't know how anymore. You're holding them, Sophia said simply. You're here, in this moment, with us. That's how. Harrison felt something crack open in his chest. Not breaking, but opening, like a door that had been locked for too long. I love you, he said, the words coming out rough and urgent. I love you so much, Sophia. I've loved you every day, even when I was too stupid to show it. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure crumbled. I love you too, she whispered. Even when I hated you, I loved you. The honesty of it was devastating. She'd hated him, had every right to hate him, but she'd loved him anyway. She'd loved him enough to put on a red dress and walk into his world uninvited, to demand recognition, to fight for their marriage when he'd been too blind to see it was worth fighting for. I want to take you home, Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to put our daughters to bed and hold you, and tell you every day how beautiful you are, how brilliant you are, how lucky I am to be your husband. We can't leave yet, Sophia said, but there was something in her voice. Hope, perhaps, or possibility. The presentation isn't over. I don't care about the presentation, Harrison said, and realized he meant it. I don't care about Robert or the European expansion or any of it. I care about you. I care about them. I care about us. As if summoned by his words, Robert Meridian appeared at the entrance to the alcove, his expression carefully neutral. Harrison, he said, his voice carrying a note of professional concern. I hope everything is, well? Harrison looked at the man who had offered him everything he'd thought he wanted, and felt nothing but indifference. Everything is perfect, he said. Excellent. Then perhaps we could discuss. Actually, Harrison interrupted, I need to withdraw from consideration for the European position. Robert's eyebrows rose. I'm sorry. The European expansion. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not available for that level of travel commitment. Harrison. Robert's voice carried a note of warning. I think you should consider this decision more carefully. Opportunities like this don't come along often. You're right, Harrison agreed. They don't. But opportunities to be present for your family, to watch your daughters grow up, to be the husband your wife deserves. Those opportunities don't come along often either. And I've been missing them. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Harrison could see the calculations happening in Robert's mind, the reassessment of his potential, the quiet closing of doors that had been open moments before. I see, Robert said finally. Well, I hope you don't come to regret this decision. I won't, Harrison said with absolute certainty. The only thing I regret is taking so long to make it. After Robert left, Harrison turned back to Sophia, who was watching him with an expression that combined surprise, hope, and something that might have been pride. You just turned down the opportunity of a lifetime, she said softly. No, Harrison corrected. I just chose the opportunity of a lifetime. The opportunity to be the man you fell in love with. The opportunity to be the father our daughters deserve. Sophia's composure finally cracked completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle the sob that escaped. "Hey," Harrison said gently, shifting the sleeping twins so he could reach for her. "Hey, it's okay. I thought I'd lost you," Sophia whispered against his shoulder. "I thought I'd lost the man I married." "You didn't lose me," Harrison said, his lips against her hair. "I was just hiding. From you, from myself, from everything that mattered. But I'm here now. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The alcove felt removed from the rest of the world, a private sanctuary where they could rebuild what had been broken. Harrison could hear the distant sounds of the gala continuing. Applause, conversation, the careful orchestration of wealth and influence. But it all felt meaningless compared to the weight of his family in his arms. "Take me home," Sophia said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Please, Harrison. Take us home." Harrison pulled back to look at her face, memorizing the way the light caught her tears, the way her lipstick was slightly smudged from their closeness. She was beautiful, had always been beautiful, but there was something different now, something more vulnerable and open than he'd seen in months. "Are you sure?" he asked. "We could stay, finish the presentation." "I'm sure," Sophia said firmly. "I got what I came for." "What did you come for?" "You," she said simply. "I came for you." The truth of it hit Harrison like a physical blow. She hadn't come to embarrass him, or make a scene, or prove a point. She'd come to fight for their marriage, to reclaim her husband, to demand recognition of what they'd built together. And she'd won. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is fight for love, even when you're not sure the other person will fight back. Have you ever had to make a choice between success and family? What matters most when everything is on the line? Share your thoughts below. "Let's go home," Harrison said, and the words felt like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something new. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Harrison realized that he was walking away from more than just a gala. He was walking away from the version of himself that had prioritized ambition over love, success over family, image over authenticity. He was walking towards something infinitely more valuable. The chance to be present, to be seen, to be loved for who he truly was rather than what he'd achieved. The twins stirred as they moved toward the exit, Emma opening sleepy eyes to smile at him with absolute trust. Grace remained deeply asleep, her head on his shoulder, her small hand fisted in his burgundy lapel. "Ready?" Sophia asked, her red dress rustling as she adjusted her wrap. "Ready," Harrison said, and meant it completely. They walked out of the museum together, past the remaining gala guests, past the whispers and stares and speculation. Harrison felt the weight of professional relationships shifting, of opportunities closing, of the carefully constructed network he'd built beginning to fracture. He'd never felt more free in his life. Outside, the October night was crisp and clear, the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Harrison's driver was waiting with the car, and as they settled into the leather seats, Sophia beside him, the twins secure in their car seats, Harrison felt something he hadn't experienced in months. "Peace." "Harrison," Sophia said softly as the car pulled away from the curb. "Yes. Thank you for choosing us." Harrison reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in the darkness. "Thank you for making me remember what I was choosing between." The city flowed past outside the windows, but Harrison barely noticed. His attention was focused on the woman beside him, on the children sleeping peacefully in their seats, on the family he'd almost lost through his own blindness. He was home before he'd even reached the house. Home was wherever they were, and he was finally present enough to recognize it. The ride home was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of the engine and the soft breathing of sleeping children. Harrison found himself studying Sophia's profile in the passing streetlights, marveling at how the same woman, who had walked into his world with such fierce determination, could now look so peaceful, so vulnerable. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked softly, catching him staring. "How beautiful you are," Harrison said, and the words felt different now, Not automatic or routine, but observed, appreciated, real. How brave you were tonight. I was terrified, Sophia admitted, her fingers tightening around his. Walking into that room, knowing everyone would be watching, knowing I might fail. You didn't fail, Harrison said firmly. You saved us. The car pulled into their circular driveway, and Harrison felt a shift in perspective as he looked at their home. The mansion still spoke of success and achievement, but now he saw it differently, not as a monument to his ambition, but as a place where his family lived, where his daughters were learning to walk and talk and discover the world. Let me, Harrison said as Sophia moved to unbuckle Emma's car seat. Please. There was something profound about carrying his sleeping daughters into their home, about feeling their weight in his arms as he climbed the stairs to their nursery. How many times had he missed this ritual? How many bedtimes had he delegated to Sophia while he worked late or attended essential meetings? The nursery was exactly as he remembered it, but somehow different, warmer, more alive. Sophia moved with quiet efficiency, dimming the lights and preparing the cribs while Harrison held both twins, reluctant to let them go. Emma first, Sophia whispered, and Harrison gently placed his daughter in her crib. She stirred slightly, making the soft sounds of a child settling into deep sleep, and Harrison found himself standing there, watching her breathe, marveling at the perfect curve of her cheek. You can watch her sleep anytime, Sophia said gently, understanding his reluctance to leave. She'll be here in the morning. She'll be here in the morning. The promise felt like a gift, like a second chance he didn't deserve, but was desperate to claim. Harrison placed Grace in her crib with the same careful attention, his hand lingering on her small back as she curled into her favorite sleeping position. I used to do this every night, Sophia said quietly, adjusting Grace's blanket. Stand here and watch them sleep and wonder if you'd ever want to see this. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. I'm sorry, he said, and the inadequacy of the phrase felt crushing. I'm so sorry, Sophia. I don't know how. Stop, Sophia said, pressing her finger to his lips. Stop apologizing and start being present. That's all I ever wanted. Harrison caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. I want to be present for everything. Every bedtime, every breakfast, every moment I've been missing. Then be, Sophia said simply, and there was something in her voice that made Harrison's pulse quicken. Starting now. The walk to their bedroom felt charged with possibility, with the weight of choices made and bridges rebuilt. Harrison found himself really seeing their space for the first time in months. The way Sophia had arranged fresh flowers on her nightstand. The way she'd left a book half open on the chair, where she must have been reading while waiting for him to come home. I love you, Harrison said as they reached their bedroom, the words feeling both familiar and new. I love you, and I've been a fool. You love me? Sophia asked, turning to face him. Or do you love the idea of me? The question was like a test, a challenge to prove that his transformation was real. Harrison stepped closer, his hands finding her waist, feeling the warmth of her body through the red silk. I love the way you hum when you're concentrating, he said, his voice low and intense. I love the way you curl your toes when you're thinking. I love how you make everything better just by being in the room. Harrison, I love how you fought for us tonight, he continued, his thumbs tracing circles on her waist. I love how you looked walking into that room, like a queen, like a woman who knows her worth. I love how you've been the perfect mother to our daughters, even when I was too blind to be their father. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't pull away. I love you too, she whispered. Even when I hated you, I loved you. Show me, Harrison said, his voice rough with emotion. Show me how to love you the way you deserve. Sophia's answer was to rise on her toes and kiss him, her lips soft and warm against his. The kiss was tentative at first, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile, but it deepened quickly, months of separation and longing poured into the connection. Harrison's hands tangled in her hair, careful not to disturb the elegant styling, but desperate to touch her, to prove to himself that this was real. Sophia's arms wound around his neck, her body pressing against his with a need that matched his own. I missed this, Sophia whispered against his lips. I missed you. I'm here, Harrison said, his hands exploring the familiar curves of her body through the silk dress. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. The red dress that had announced her arrival at the gala now seemed like armor being shed, piece by piece, as they rediscovered each other. Harrison took his time, worshipping every inch of revealed skin, relearning the geography of his wife's body with reverent hands and lips. You're so beautiful, he murmured against her throat, tasting the salt of her skin. So perfect. I'm not perfect, Sophia said, her hands working at the buttons of his shirt. I'm just me. You're perfect for me, Harrison corrected, and the truth of it was overwhelming. You're everything I need, everything I've been too stupid to see. Their lovemaking was different from the mechanical encounters of recent months. Slower, more intentional, charged with emotion and genuine connection. Harrison found himself memorizing every sound Sophia made, every expression that crossed her face, every way she responded to his touch. I love you, he whispered against her ear as they moved together, the words a prayer and a promise. I love you, I love you, I love you. Show me, Sophia breathed, her nails digging into his back. Show me every day. Afterward, they lay tangled in their sheets, Sophia's head on Harrison's chest, their breathing slowly returning to normal. Harrison traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, marveling at how right this felt, how complete. The European expansion, Sophia said quietly, her fingers drawing circles on his chest. Are you sure about turning it down? I've never been more sure of anything, Harrison said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I almost lost you tonight, Sophia. I almost lost everything that matters, because I was chasing things that don't. Your mother won't be pleased, Sophia said with a small smile. She's been planning how to spend the additional income for months. My mother can plan whatever she wants, Harrison said firmly. This is our life, our family, our choice. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, the house quiet around them. Harrison found himself listening for the sounds of their daughters sleeping, for the gentle rhythm of their home at peace. What happens now? Sophia asked. Now we rebuild, Harrison said. Now I learn how to be the husband and father I should have been all along. It won't be easy, Sophia warned. Changing patterns, learning new ways of being together. The best things never are, Harrison replied, and meant it. 3 months later, Harrison stood in the same kitchen where his transformation had begun, but everything was different now. The marble countertops still gleamed, the German appliances still hummed with efficiency, but the space felt alive in a way it never had before. Dada! Emma's voice rang out as she toddled toward him, her arms outstretched. Harrison scooped her up, spinning her around until she giggled with delight. Good morning, sweetheart, he said, kissing her cheek. Did you sleep well? Book, Grace announced from her high chair, where she was systematically destroying a piece of toast. Dada book. After breakfast, Harrison promised, settling Emma into her own high chair. We'll read whatever you want. Sophia emerged from the pantry, her hair in a casual ponytail, wearing jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger, more relaxed. She wasn't dressed for a gala or a business meeting. She was dressed for life, for being present, for the 1,000 small moments that made up a day. The Morrison meeting got moved to 2, she said, checking her phone. That gives us time for the park after lunch. Perfect, Harrison said, and meant it. The Morrison meeting, like all his meetings now, was scheduled around his family's needs, not the other way around. Are you sure you don't mind? Sophia asked, though she was smiling. I know the swings aren't exactly your natural habitat. My natural habitat is wherever you are, Harrison said, pulling her close for a kiss. Wherever they are. Everything else is just geography. The morning routine, that had once felt like a series of interruptions, now felt like a privilege. Harrison helped with breakfast, played peekaboo with Grace, read 3 stories to Emma, and found himself marveling at how much he'd missed, how much richness had been happening in his absence. The Meridian Foundation called, Sophia said as they cleaned up the breakfast dishes together. They want to discuss your potential involvement in the new Family Services Initiative. Harrison paused, a dish towel in his hands. What did you tell them? That you'd consider it if they were interested in having both of us involved, Sophia said, her tone casual, but her eyes watching his reaction carefully. I may have mentioned that I have experience in event planning and fundraising. And they're very interested in meeting with both of us, Sophia said, her smile widening. Apparently, word has gotten around about the woman who walked into their gala uninvited and completely stole the show. Harrison felt a surge of pride, so strong it was almost physical. Of course they want to meet with you. You're brilliant. We're brilliant, Sophia corrected. When we work together. When we work together. The phrase felt like a promise, like a glimpse of the future they were building. Not Harrison's world that Sophia was allowed to visit, but their world, shared and equal and whole. I love you, Harrison said, and the words felt as fresh and true as they had the first time he'd said them. I love you too, Sophia replied, and then, with a smile that reminded him of the woman who'd conquered his world in a red dress, she added, Now help me wrangle these children. We have a life to live. Harrison looked around the kitchen, at the high chairs and sippy cups, at the organized chaos of a family in motion, at the woman who'd saved him from himself, and felt a contentment deeper than any business success had ever provided. This was wealth. This was achievement. This was everything he'd been too blind to see. Ready? Sophia asked, Emma on her hip, Grace reaching for Harrison with determined hands. Ready, Harrison said, gathering his daughter close. I'm ready for everything. As they headed toward the door, Harrison caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror. The man looking back was different from the one who'd left for a gala 3 months ago. He was still successful, still driven, still ambitious. But now his ambitions were grounded in something real, something that mattered. He was a husband who saw his wife, a father who was present, a man who'd learned the difference between building a life and living one. The lake outside their windows was no longer empty. They had picnics there now, fed ducks with day-old bread, played in the shallow water while Emma and Grace shrieked with delight. Harrison had kept his promise, the one he'd made to a pregnant Sophia in a different lifetime, when he'd still known what mattered most. Harrison. Sophia's voice called from the doorway. You coming? He looked at his family waiting for him, really looked at them, the way he'd learned to do, and felt his heart expand with gratitude. Coming, he said, and meant it in every possible way. True wealth isn't measured in dollars or deals. It's measured in presence, in love, in the moments that make up a life well lived. Sometimes we have to lose everything to realize what we already had. What does real success look like to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts on what matters most when everything else falls away. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and the house settled into the quiet contentment of a home where love lived and grew, and was tended with the attention it deserved. Harrison Gatsby had built an empire, but he'd found his kingdom in the arms of the woman who'd loved him enough to fight for him, in the laughter of the daughters who'd never doubted he would come home to them. He was finally completely, profoundly home.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.